One of the things that we really struggle with in security is talking about the value of what we do. And one of the ways that we can do this is by really connecting ourselves to the business. But a lot of people really struggle with trying to figure out how to actually do this. So, what I want to talk about today is something that I think is really important that a lot of people really miss when they're talking about the value of security, and especially when they're talking about cybersecurity risk and what that means to the business. I'm Andrew Townley, and today I'm going to talk to you about how cyber risk is actually business risk. Let's get started. Okay, so today we're going to talk about why cyber is in fact a business risk. And hopefully this will give you a lot more insights as to what we really need to be thinking and talking about when it comes to cybersecurity, especially when we're talking to the executives and the rest of the organization about what it is we do. But before we get on to that, we've got to do some background stuff, because one of the things that I think is actually missing the most is people don't really understand systems. And if you don't understand systems and core systems theory, then it's going to be really, really hard to talk about what it is that we do in security. So I'm going to start off with a very, very, very brief overview of what systems theory is and what systems thinking means. My primary influences with systems thinking are really three people: Peter Senge, Donella Meadows, and Russell Ackoff. And my systems thinking journey started with Peter Senge's work in, I don't know, 2004 or something like that, when I first encountered it. When I started teaching and doing more around maybe 2015 to 2019 around systems, I was looking for a little bit more about what Senge calls the systems archetypes. And that's how I found the work of Donella Meadows. And really, the common thread between Peter Senge and Donella Meadows is a branch of systems thinking called system dynamics. System dynamics was really invented originally by a man named Jay Forrester, who has nothing to do with Forrester, the consulting company. But this is really what a lot of people who understand systems thinking to be. And so did I. At one point, I didn't realize that there was a whole rich field of systems thinking with a bunch of different interpretations and nuances to it, until I ran across the work of Russell Ackoff. And Russell Ackoff has had more influence on my thinking in terms of systems, as well as business management and strategic planning and just a lot of things in general. He brings together in a way that changed the way I look at a lot of different things. So most of what I'm going to tell you is actually, while it started with my exposure to Peter Senge and Donella Meadows, it's actually been codified and unified, I suppose, by my exposure to Russell Ackoff. So what I'm going to talk about mostly comes based on his work. And we need to start with the definition of a system, because systems are something that everybody talks about all the time. We've got, all kinds of systems around us all over the place, and everybody uses the word and everybody expects that we understand it the same way. But most people don't really understand what the essential definition of a system truly is. And this is a definition that I put together recently that's trying to take the academics out of it and really make it more accessible to people, so that it's easier for people to understand how their life is in fact affected by the systems that are around us all the time. So a system is any collection of two or more elements that work together to deliver a function or result that none of those elements can deliver individually. Now, this is a simple thing to say, but it's a really important and powerful concept to get. So as I talk about the different kinds of systems, I'm going to give you some examples, because what a system is really about the function that it provides. There are many different ways that it could be internally structured to provide that function, and that's where we get the infinite richness and variety of the world around us. The fact that we can have however many different kinds and makes of cars, however many different kinds and makes of airplanes, each way in particular a particular system is created is up to us. as long as it delivers the function it's supposed to deliver. And that function is a function of those parts working together. You separate the system, it dissolves. It can't perform the function because none of the parts independently are capable of providing the function of all of the parts working together. So there's an expression people often say that, the thing is the sum of its parts. Well, this is not true when you're talking about systems, because if you take a systems view, it's not the sum of the parts or the sum of our understanding of the parts. It's really exponentially and some function of those parts working together that's what really matters and makes a system interesting to think and talk about, or to use to help us get our work done. So the work of Russell Ackoff defines a number of different types of systems, and it's worth kind of giving you a sense of what this is, because if you just think about one particular type of system, you might get a little bit stuck in your understanding. And it's really, if we're going to be successful in security, we need to have the broadest possible interpretation of general systems theory that we can, so that we aren't blind to seeing systems around us all the time. So the first type of system is what's called deterministic systems. And a deterministic system is a mechanical system whose behavior as a whole and as individual parts is predetermined by its internal structure and operating environment. So deterministic systems basically are tools that we build because they perform in predictable ways. And even when something, like a complex system like a computer performs in unpredictable ways, its unpredictability is really down to a function of the way the individual parts can possibly perform together. And what is unpredictable about it is actually that it didn't deliver the function we expected. It delivered some other kind of function, but it's still deterministic. Even a computer in the weird machine state, if you want to go into that realm of research at all, is still deterministic because they're machines that can only do certain things. You can't introduce new functions into a machine that are not a function of the functions it already has. Those essential building blocks are used, and if we understand what those essential building blocks are, then we have a way of understanding and predicting the behavior of the system. That's why they're called deterministic systems. For the same input, they should always give the same output, unless something internally in the structure or behavior of those parts working together has changed. And of course, if those things change, then the output that we get for a given input is going to change as well, because the output or the function of the system is a function of the way each of the individual parts internally work together. So examples of mechanical deterministic systems are, of course, cars, airplanes, computers. Anything that we build as tools are systems of systems of systems of systems, and we can take them apart and we can look at them in any way, but each of those systems shares the common property that they're all deterministic. And because they're all deterministic, we can assemble these systems and we can control and predict their behavior. Then we have animate systems. Animate systems are the animals and things that have any kind of consciousness, including humans. So there's two examples here. And animate systems are also systems of systems. So this is a horse that shows part of its digestive system and its skeletal system. And we've got the various subsystems of the human body exposed there in that explosion. And so you can talk about any whole in terms of any number of systems that you can identify that perform some sub-function within them that makes sense. So if we want to talk about we don't feel good after we eat, well, there's a good chance that we're going to start with the digestive system. We're not going to worry about the rest of it, like, a respiratory system or any of the other parts of blood circulatory system, until we determine that the most obvious place to start isn't relevant anymore. But then we move out, because we understand that not only are there multiple systems within the system acting as subsystems, but we know how those subsystems are connected. We understand the relationship between the digestive system and the circulatory system. and the respiratory system, because the commonality there is all of it is somehow related to feeding our circulatory system so that we have enough blood, we have enough oxygen in our blood so that we can live. So what is an animate system then? Well, an animate system is a biological system that is capable of automatic reactions, chosen responses, and self-determined actions in response to internal events or based on conscious choice. So this is really where we get into the discussion, if you've heard me talk about it before, of the things that we can really control. We can control our activity and our behavior. So our activity is the things that we choose to do, those self-determined actions that we have, and our behavior is how we choose to respond to events. And one of the things that humans have over other animate systems is that we can exercise control over the gap between our automatic reactions, feelings, and emotions, and the responses that we choose to take in as a result of those. The next kind of system, building on things, is a social system. So a social system is a system that contains essential parts that are animate systems that display choice, but which may also include mechanical parts employed by those animate systems to enable the delivery of the system's function or to control or influence its overall behavior. So on the left, we have the system of systems of systems that is someone riding a horse. So there's two animate system elements involved there. There's the human, which itself is a system. There's the horse, which is itself a system. And if assuming that you're riding the horse with some sort of controls like a bridle, a bit, a saddle, and whatever, those are deterministic systems that perform a function that allows you to harness the animate system of the horse so that it can perform the function you want it to perform, which is to take you from place to place. You don't get on a horse generally to wander around and let it go where it wants to go unless you just want to relax and kind of just see what you can see. You get on a horse because you want to use that horse for some purpose that you have, but you can't fulfill that purpose without the horse. So you need to influence the behavior of the horse, which has its own free will and its own ideas about what it's wanting to do, via the application of deterministic mechanical means, like the bridle, the bit, the saddle, in order to fulfill the function of the complete social system, which is you, the horse, and the tack, and everything else. Other social systems are our teams that we work with every day, governments, groups, clubs, society as a whole. The human race as an entire entity is obviously a meta system of systems of social systems that all work together with different agendas, different ideas about how things should be done, and those need to be somehow worked out. There's interactions, there's predictable interactions, there's potentially unpredictable interactions. But again, even with these complex systems, what's important to understand is there's only so many different states any individual element within those systems can be in, and therefore there's only so many actions it can take in response to those internal states. So even though you think that you're getting into social systems which are chaotic or uncontrollable or whatever, once you start looking a little closer and you understand what the elements are and what their motivations are, then you actually can go quite a long way to predict their behavior. The last kind of system is an ecological system. Now, ecological systems are kind of special because they are a system of interacting mechanistic, animated, and social subsystems without a specific purpose of their own. So the system itself doesn't have a purpose other than providing the inputs necessary and processing the waste discharged in the creation, functioning, and survival of the subsystems it contains. So if you think about the environment, the world, our ecological systems that are around us all the time, they provide us food, they process our waste, they deal with the things that and respond to the things that we put in them, like buildings and bridges and dams and things like that. And so the ecological system is sort of the largest system that we can potentially talk about. And again, because it is a system within which it has animate, mechanical, and social subsystems, we can, if we want to, identify specific relationships between these systems that help us understand the world. It helps us understand events, and it helps us understand what's really going on. And how this, you may be thinking, well, okay, Andrew, what the hell does this have anything to do with security? But if you don't understand this core theory and these four types of systems and understand the nature and potential states of each kind of system and the way those systems relate to each other and interact, then in fact, you're not going to be very successful in security. And this is part of the problem that we have, because while people may have been tangentially exposed or absorbed some systems theory via osmosis and or formalized learning, systems engineering, these sorts of things, those are very specific applications of systems thinking. And if we want to be successful in security, I don't care if you're a pen tester, or if you're a security operations person, or the CISO, or an architect, or even an executive in a multi-billion-dollar global organization that I work with most of the time, you still need to understand systems, because if you don't understand systems, you're going to try to manage each of these parts individually, and it's not going to go the way you expect, and you're not going to know why. And if you think about all of the things that we're struggling with right now in security, we're trying to manage lots of individual parts on a very, very discrete basis, and we can't figure out why we're not getting ahead. Well, we're not getting ahead because we don't understand the relationships of those things to each other and the wider world. That's why we need to understand each of these four system types and bring that understanding into the environment that we're trying to protect from a security perspective. Because if we don't, we're not actually going to get anywhere. And in fact, things are going to get worse. What this means is we can apply all of what I just told you to our organization, and we can treat our organization as a system within an environment, within an ecological system. We can decompose it in certain ways. We can use patterns of decomposition. There's 3 different patterns of decomposition of an organization here. One is the business model canvas, which you may have heard of. One is the enterprise baseline perspective, which is part of the baseline perspectives of the agile security system that I developed back in 2019. And then you've got Porter's value chain. What they are doing is they are talking about the elements of an organization and the relationships between those elements, which perform a particular function. And different sets of elements and different sets of relationships are going to help you look at different aspects of the organization depending on what you're worried about. In the same way that you have the digestive system, the nervous system, the circulatory system, and those other various systems of the human body. We can focus on one, but when the limits of what we understand and can influence based on that system are exhausted, we need to know what are the larger systems of which it is a part, so that we can look to see what other avenues we have to solve our problems. And this is what we're not doing in security. This is what we're not doing in most business organizations around the world. And until we do, we are not going to be able to solve the problems that we face today in our world. They've just gotten too complicated. They've gotten too connected and interdependent, and we can't solve isolated problems anymore. Problems don't come in isolation. Problems come in bunches, as I'm going to explain to you shortly. But before I do that, we've got to step way back, and we got to talk about risk, because everybody in security talks about risk. Most people in security don't really get it, because they think threats, vulnerabilities, and risk and impact and likelihood are all kind of more or less the same. They're not. And in fact, risk is actually very simple, because if it wasn't, we wouldn't be able to live our lives. We make risk-based decisions all the time based on our experience and an almost automatic evaluation of our risk appetite versus the perceived risk we have in our environment. We understand risk inherently as humans, because if we didn't, we wouldn't still be alive. So what does this mean when we're talking about security? Well, part of what we've done in security is we've focused too much on the threats, vulnerabilities, and compliance risks that we manage on a day-to-day basis. We're more worried about all the different potential threats and risks than we are about what risk actually means. Because if we understand what risk actually means, we start to realize that a lot of that stuff we're worried about on one level is actually noise. And if we can come up with a good way from a holistic and a conceptual perspective to think about and manage risk and talk about risk, then a lot of the issues that we have chasing our tails with all of the other individual risks and all these new emerging risks and all these new things become not really so new anymore. So that's what I want to talk about now. Because if you understand systems and if you understand the fundamental nature of risk, then your entire world changes as a security professional, even as an enterprise risk professional, and certainly as an executive or a board member trying to understand both enterprise risk and cybersecurity risk, because it's not that hard. We're too focused on all the details to understand that it's not so hard. Yes, it's difficult to do all the activities that we have to do, but we can't see any other ways to do it until we start stepping back and we start really looking again at the fundamentals of what it is we're doing and why we're doing it. And that's what I'm here to do for you today. So let's talk about risk. Now, you might recognize this guy here because his name is Frank Abagnale. And some people like him, some people hate him, some people won't share the stage with him, whatever. That's not the point. The point is that since his career popularized, his life popularized by the movie Catch Me If You Can came out, he ended up, as you saw in the end of the movie, as an FBI agent. And what he does is he investigates fraud cases. And of course, most of the interesting fraud cases now have some cyber component to it. So this is what he did when he was with the FBI. So he works breaches. And what he does is he tries to understand what really happened in the breach, because of his unique background and the skills that he has that he's used as an adversary, he's looking at it to see what it is that actually happened. So this quote is something that came out of a talk that he did at Google a long time ago. I don't even remember how I found it, but the quote says, "I've worked every breach back to TJ Maxx, and this is what I've learned. First of all, every breach occurs because somebody in that company did something they weren't supposed to do, or somebody in that company failed to do something that they were supposed to do. Hackers don't cause breaches, people do, and every breach comes down to that." Now, there's a number of different ways to interpret this. And what we've done in security is we've kind of taken it and gone down the burn the witches track, which is, oh, well, if people cause breaches, then people are stupid, people are evil, people need to be stopped. We can't trust the people to run with the scissors. So we need to prevent the people from doing anything that could cause them harm. This is just stupid because it doesn't account for understanding people, both from the strengths and the weakness perspective. And as part of that understanding, it ignores all of psychology and human behavior that we can actually use to help figure out what we need to do to make our environments really secure. Because if we just focus on the negative, oh, people are bad, we're not going to get any far. We're not going to get very far. So in order to put this into a little bit more academic context with a lot more punch behind it, I want to share with you 2 points from Russ Lakoff. Now, Russ Lakoff, as I mentioned, is one of the people who's influenced my systems thinking journey more than anybody else at this point. But part of what he applied his systems thinking expertise to was improving the performance of organizations. And as part of that, he worked with management and executives to figure out what needed to be done to build effective organizations. And one of the things that he observed, there's many things, and I really encourage you to check out his work. It's phenomenal, and you will expand your mind quite a bit if you start digging into a lot of his work. But what he says is there are 2 types of mistakes: errors of commission and errors of omission. Now, this should sound familiar because this is exactly what Abagnale was talking about. An error of commission occurs when an organization or an individual does something that should not have been done. An error of omission occurs when an individual or organization fails to do something it should have done. So now we've got names for the things that Abigail was talking about that cause all of the breaches he's ever seen in his entire career. Errors of commission, errors of omission. Of the two types, errors of omission are usually the most important. However, the accounting systems in the Western world only take account of errors of commission. Because we only track the things that we do, we generally don't track the things that we don't. And except for security, it's often really hard to figure out whether the things that we discarded were really the right thing that we should have done in the first place. However, from a security perspective, it's really good at helping us surface all of the errors of omission that we made in our security programs when things like these breaches happen and people get grilled. CEOs of large billion-dollar companies, multi-billion-dollar companies get grilled by the US Senate about cybersecurity 101. Well, why didn't you do this? Well, you could say that that was an error of omission, but was it, or was it an error of commission based on information that they had? This is where things start to really get interesting. But the implications here are that what it means is if we only track the things that we decide to do, and therefore we can only track the things that mistakes we've made in those things that we've said we were going to do, people don't want to really get blamed for stuff. We don't like being in trouble. So where does this actually influence people to do? It influences them to give them an implicit mandate to do as little as they can get away with so that they don't screw anything up. So if I don't do anything, I'm not going to get penalized for it because I didn't commit to anything, and nobody's going to know that I was supposed to be doing something because that's an error of omission and I'm not tracking that. So if you really step back and you think about what this means, it means these are the only root sources of risk there can possibly be: errors of commission or errors of omission. Everything else is a manifestation of one or the other of those things. I don't care what particular type of risk or threat or vulnerability or exploit or breach or whatever you want to talk about. It can all be traced back to somebody doing one or more of those things over time. That means we have a fundamental definition of risk that is different than the one most people understand. What is risk really? Risk is the potential likelihood that something will stop you from getting what you want. Because if I make the wrong decision, or if I don't make the decision I should have made, I'm not going to get what I want. And we have to understand that in this context, a system is part of a larger system, and any of the parts may also be treated as a system rather than the individual whole, and each one of those systems can fail to deliver its function. If it fails to deliver the function, the entire system gets upset. So why would somebody fail to deliver their function? Well, because they make a mistake, or they deliberately choose to do something that they weren't supposed to do. That's it. And this is powerful. This gives us a whole new way of thinking about risk and security. So let's see what this means. First, we need to understand how we traditionally think about risk. We traditionally think about risk in terms of different classifications of taxonomy. And we assign the management of those different types of risks to different organizational functions. Each one of those things is treated as a part, and we manage those parts separately. And we believe that if we manage our strategic risk and our operational risk and our financial risk and our compliance risk and our reputational risk and the emerging risk, that we have our risk managed. But it doesn't work that way. Because in fact, if you follow what I've been saying, there's really only one kind of risk that's possible, and that's operational risk. Because the definition of operational risk is the risk of loss resulting from the inadequate or failed internal processes, people, and systems, or from external events. And what the or from external events really means is that we failed to plan adequately for those external events, or we made a decision that was to ignore that we should be planning for those external events. So we can't control those external events. The only thing we can control is our activity and our behavior, and that's based on the decisions we make with the understanding of the world that we have. And those decisions may be errors of commission or errors of omission. And even any decision may have aspects of both. This is just fundamental. But if we don't understand the fundamental nature of risk and the fact that risks exist in the world, they're not in these nice little boxes, then we can't make any progress. You can see it every day in the headlines. We're not making any progress. This is not how it works. We can't figure out why we can't throw more automation at it, throw more people at it. We're going to fix this part. We're going to optimize this part. Well, we're not accounting for the whole system. If we fix this part, what have we broken? What have we delayed? What have we not enabled? How many people are really looking at that? Seriously, how many people are really taking a systems view of risk? Hardly anybody. And that's the problem, because risks are a system. There is a path between any two risks in the system through any of the other risks that we are treating as an isolated element and we are trying to manage in an isolated way, especially cybersecurity risk. That's why I put it in the middle of this diagram. What this diagram does is shows the relationships between each of these different types of risk that we're not managing as a collected whole. We're managing parts. We're managing liquidity risk. We're managing market risk. We're managing reputational risk. And we don't understand why our efforts to manage those risks is so hard. Well, this picture right here is why it's so hard. Because we don't understand the relationships. We don't understand the system of risks that we are actually trying to manage. Because if we do, then we can start to see the leverage we have at wherever we are making the decisions we have that are related to those risks. This is what I'm talking about. We have to see the relationships. We have to understand the relationships. Because if we don't understand the relationships, we don't know where our leverage is. And if we don't know where our leverage is, we're not going to be successful. We might as well be pissing into the ocean, because that's all the good it's really going to do us. We may manage this thing here, but if this thing is actually not as important as this thing over here, and we're not worrying about this one at all, we've spent all of our money, we've spent all of our effort, and we're not doing the right thing in the right place. This is what happens every day in security programs in the entire world, not just here in the US. So we need to take a different view of the way these things work if we want different outcomes. So risks exist as a function of the errors of commission or omission and the errors that other people make based on the impacts of those initial errors. So if I am making a decision based on information given to me by somebody who made an error of omission or commission, how good is the decision I'm going to make? I'm going to be basing it on flawed information. And if I base it on flawed information, what's my decision going to be? Wrong. It's going to be an error of commission or omission because I didn't understand what I needed to do. And whoever responds to whatever I do, it's a chain. And it goes forever. There's no end if you believe in systems thinking. So what we need to do is we need to understand these core relationships. And if we want to talk about the value of cybersecurity, The value of cybersecurity is the way these things impact all of those other types of risk. So we are contributing information into the way that those decisions are made in those areas of risk in terms of either creating more risk or reducing more risk. It's not just about reputation and trust and whatever people think is all that we can really talk about from an upside perspective. Absolutely not. This is why we don't get we can't communicate the value of security in business terms, because we don't understand security in business terms. But we can if we understand risk, because business execution is effective risk management. That's what has to happen if businesses are going to get the results they get. That's why security is the most important thing we can do. And that's why security is the degree of confidence someone has that they're going to get what they want. Full stop. If we can talk about that, security can't be optional anymore. If you want to talk about security architecture are all of the conceptual models that make sure I get what I want. Security architecture is the enveloping architecture of the organization. It's not this bolt-on to enterprise architecture or this bolt-on to solution architecture or a cross-cutting concern or a non-functional requirement or any of those things. That's ridiculous. That's why it's not working, because we're not looking at it the right way. So if we want to actually do better, we need to think differently. And once we think differently, we will see the leverage that we really have. And once more organizations recognize the leverage that they really have, they can apply all the resources that they have today to doing the right things, or to being engaged in the right place, or to talking about security in the right way. That's how we're going to get better security. That's how we are going to change the entire industry. But it starts with changing the definition of what we do based on how it fits into the world in which we do it. And that's what I've tried to show you today. Once again, I'm Andrew Townley, and this is an Archistry Club Insight. And if you want to know more, learn more, figure out how you can apply this to yourself in your own work, your organization, adopt it as part of the way of thinking and doing security, there's two next steps that are probably going to work for you. First one is you can get the book, because I wrote a lot of this core thinking down from an architecture perspective in terms of the book, Getting Started with the Agile Security System. And this book is available from the QR code or by following that link, archistry.club/book, or you can join us inside the Archistry Club, because inside the Archistry Club is a bunch of people who think the same way I just described about the job we do in security and are looking for ways to do it better. And there's not many of us around. So we need to be able to have each other's backs. We need to be able to help each other out. We need to be able to learn and grow together, because we are definitely in the minority here. And until we can show that this is really what it's going to take, we're going to get crushed by all of that best practice stuff out there by the security establishment, because there's more of them than there is of us. So if this resonated with you, please subscribe to this channel, share it with your friends, share it on socials, and see what you can do yourself today to start adopting this kind of thinking in your own work. And that's where getting the book will help, because this book helps you see how it applies to security. You can watch some of the other videos that talk about how I use this to apply to security. Subscribe to the channel, because much more along these lines is going to come. So thanks very much for your time and attention. I'm Andrew Townley. We'll see you soon. Stay safe.